Hello, welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. I am Andrew Musgrove and he is Mark Quillers, and it's time for the Monday show. We're here to discuss Newcastle United's superb 2-1 victory over Manchester City in the Premier League as the Magpies deservedly beat Pep Guardiola's men. We'll run through how they did it and look at the wider talking points. As always, we are sponsored by NordVPN. And if you're lucky enough to be travelling out to Marseille to watch Newcastle in the Champions League, then sign up to NordVPN could be for you. Click the link in the podcast description box for a discounted offer on your plan. Keep yourself safe while online while you are travelling. There's no risk with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Mark, how are you keeping? You well?
I'm good. Busy weekend, but thankfully a successful one. Feels a lot easier talking about this than we did 2 weeks ago, doesn't it?
It does. And that's where I want to begin. I have to offer Eddie Howe an apology and Newcastle United. Last week, I was so pessimistic about the game against Manchester City. I genuinely feared a thumping. Thanks to everyone who's got in touch over the weekend demanding that I say sorry to the gaffer and the team. And look, I hold my hands up. I got it wrong. Newcastle didn't just beat Manchester City for me. They dominated. They dominated one of the best sides in world football and deservedly won. It wasn't hanging on. It wasn't back to the walls. It was organised. It was disciplined. It was a tactical masterclass from Howe, and the application from his players was unquestionable. There was passion. There was aggressiveness. But more importantly, Mark, there was a sense of belonging that on any given day, Newcastle United are as good as Pep Guardiola's men and his stars. There was a message of that this is our house and Man City were not leaving with 3 points. This was Newcastle United at their very best, and I've never been happier to be proved wrong about a game. So Eddie Howe, I am indeed very sorry for ever doubting you and your players.
I almost want to stand up and give you a round of applause for that. I'm not going to, but I almost want to.
Do you think Eddie will accept that apology?
I hope not.
I did genuinely fear getting a thumping, I did.
Well, look, on the back of what happened before the international break, I think there wouldn't have been too many Newcastle fans that thought that performance was coming, which, I've been thinking about how today's show will go. And I think we said that it would be a little bit frustrating if they did put in that sort of performance. But I think the elation over the result and the performance kind of overrides that frustration to a degree. I'm not going to lie, I am still frustrated by Brentford and West Ham because we know that sort of performance is in them in terms of what they did on Saturday evening. So now the challenge for me is, well, not for me, but for the players. I don't think I'll make the match day squad this week. Is to go to Everton. I know I'm looking ahead beyond Marseille, but to go to Everton and impose themselves on Everton the same way they did to Manchester City.
Well, we'll talk about that Everton game briefly at the end of the show, but let's start with, as you say, a talk of celebration, of joy, of just massive praise for Newcastle United and Eddie Howe. 2-1 against Manchester City, a brace from Harvey Barnes, either side of a Ruben Diaz equaliser, was enough to secure Eddie Howe's first win over City at the 19th attempt, and the first win for Newcastle United over City in the Premier League since 2018. Those stats alone show you the task that awaited them, and yet, as I've said, Newcastle, I felt, were relatively comfortable on Saturday evening. Mark, there is so much to discuss. VAR controversy, the pressing nature of Newcastle United, the return of Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall, and much, much more. But just briefly, your initial thoughts on what you witnessed on Saturday.
It was a Newcastle United side showing all the hallmarks of an Eddie Howe Newcastle United side. I didn't feel, I'm sorry, I keep going back to Brentford and West Ham was that. It wasn't what we expect of an Eddie Howe side. It's not what we've become accustomed to. It was everything. It was, you mentioned it in your apology there. It was passion. It was intensity. It was aggressiveness. It was blood and thunder, wasn't it? Let's be honest. And they just overrode Man City at times. But I thought as well, the discipline shown throughout the last 20 minutes was just exceptional. And I'll say it again, it was top class. It really was. To hold Man City at bay, to limit them to half chances at best when they needed that result, especially knowing what was coming on Sunday with Arsenal likely to be Tottenham. It's a big blow for Man City, and Newcastle not just defensively, but the whole defensive structure throughout the side was just exceptional. And Eddie and his coaching staff deserve massive credit for that.
You certainly do. And we're going to sing Newcastle United's praises even more. The high press, the chasing down, the physicality. But the one stat which makes it seem rather unreal in terms of the result is the fact that Newcastle United had just 33% possession. And yet, looking back at the game, it doesn't look that way. And certainly sitting at St James's Park, it never felt like Man City dominated in terms of having the ball as much as the stats paint that they did.
So good sides control a game without having the ball. And there is a modern day obsession with possession, or you only had 25% possession, or, this side had this. It doesn't matter. It's what you do with the ball when you've got it. And it's how you control the opposition when you haven't got it. And I thought what Newcastle did brilliantly was they almost manipulated Manchester City into areas they didn't want to go when they didn't have the ball. You mentioned the high press there. A lot of City's passing felt as if it was backwards and sideways because of the intense nature of Newcastle's press. Now, it's easy, particularly at St James's, when the crowd are right behind them and you can get carried away and the press everyone just goes. Newcastle pressed really intelligently, and it wasn't just a case of everyone goes and presses. It was right, this player presses in the right moments, and I think they deserve a lot of credit for doing it against a really high class side.
And that was key. It was that intensity, it was that high press, and we saw it within the first minute of the game. Bruno, right on the keeper, forces him into a sloppy pass. Joelinton wins the ball. It falls to Harvey Barnes. He should do better. He should put it in the back of the net. But in terms of that intensity and that press within the first 60 seconds, that set the tone for what was to come.
It did. And I think when you've got games like this, it's important to set the tone early on. I mean, I think it is in any game, but particularly when you're playing against one of the genuinely, best sides in the world for me, Manchester City still, even though they've had a slightly off 12 months, shall we say. So to set the tone really early on with, as you say, Bruno, who I thought was absolutely magnificent, by the way, throughout the game, to set the tone that early on really put Manchester City on the back foot and made them very, very aware, not that I think they needed to be, but made them very aware that they were in for a game.
And we mentioned there Joelinton, and I was adamant in the match preview that this is the game for Joelinton. Brentford, West Ham, I don't think it is, but Man City, when you need that physical presence, when you need someone who strikes fear into the opponent, who is ready for the battle, this is the game that you need Joelinton. And he was absolutely fantastic. And you could see throughout the game that City could not handle not just the physical presence of Joelinton, but the entire team. But it was led in the large part by the Brazilian midfielder. He won 8 out of 13 duels, 5 clearances, 3 tackles. I felt, although not man of the match, he was absolutely superb on Saturday evening.
He can't have been far away from it. And I think, look, we've said this many times this season, that there are games when it suits him. It's not when Newcastle have the ball for 50, 60%. It's when they have to press the opposition into errors, when they have to bring that intensity, that energy, that the aggression that he showed on Saturday. And I know this annoys opposition fans and some pundits as well, but it's got a place in the game, whether you like it or not. And look, Premier League football, it's a challenging environment. It's a physical environment. And I think some supporters of other clubs, now this doesn't come across as arrogant, but they have to learn that's how it is. I've watched many a side come to St James's Park and be aggressive against Newcastle, who've just rolled over in front, not recently, I will say, but in the past, I remember like players like Steven Gerrard coming up here and just bullying Newcastle. And it's quite nice to see Newcastle giving it back a bit these days. And, I think maybe the underwhelming results they've had this season, they haven't done that enough. I'd also mention the fact that there was a lot of the dark arts on Saturday. There was a lot of players going down with injuries at key times to disrupt momentum, delaying the game. And look, it's a cynical world at the top end of football. You have to do these sort of things to win big games, whether people like it or not. And I thought Newcastle looked back to the Eddie Howe side that we knew they can be.
Well, just on that, I'll be back. We'll talk about that later in the show, because that's kind of wound me up ever so slightly in the hours after the game, and I'll explain why a little bit later in the show. But you're right, Joelinton was absolutely fantastic, but the whole midfield were too. You had Sandro Tonali with that engine, chasing down the opposition. He just glides along. But Bruno Guimarães, for me, man of the match, superb. His best performance since that Liverpool game at the start of the season. He's never quite hit the heights of that. He's had his moments, but all round on Saturday evening, I thought he was just unplayable. He's always got that passion, but when he's switched on and he's pulling the strings in the middle of the park, there are a few better midfielders in the Premier League than him. And you can see why Pep Guardiola really would like him at Manchester City. Some stats for you, Mark. 31 out of 35 passes complete, which is 89%. 4 out of 9 duels won. 5 out of 5 long balls completed, which is really, really keen. Of course, an assist too for Harvey Barnes. I just felt it was an all-round top display from the captain with that passion that is always there. But on top of that, just the ability to control the game, which he did with relative ease, I would argue as well.
I thought he looked more energetic. I thought he looked fitter than he has for a few weeks, if not longer. I thought his use of the ball, the pass selection, the style of the pass, which is perfect throughout the game. I looked at the goal, the first one. That reminded me of Bruno when he first came to the club. The fact that he was able to burst into a key area, use his physique to hold off challenges, and still pick the right pass. It was such a good goal, and I feel like it hasn't been spoken about enough.
Well, I've got it written down to talk about later in the show that it was just a wonderful team goal.
Yeah.
And it had kind of every great bit of Newcastle's play involved in that goal. And it's a goal that really deserves a lot more praise. And as you say, with Bruno integral to it. And we will, again, discuss that in a second. There's a team selection decision that needs to be talked about, because you could praise any one of that starting 11 on Saturday because everybody played so well. The big call was in the centre of defence. Fabian Schär in for Sven Botman. I have to say, I wasn't totally surprised at this. Now, had Dan Burn been available, I would have thought it more likely that Burn was going to play instead of Botman. That being said, when I saw the team sheet and I saw Schär was in, I wasn't overly shocked at it because Botman hasn't been at his best in the previous 2 league games, and I felt that it might happen. Schär was great. Schär was absolutely fantastic. To come into that team out of the cold against that attacking line of Manchester City and to play like he did. I know you might want to talk about Manić Chiao in a second, and we will do. But let's talk about that decision first and the performance of Fabian Schär.
We've been calling for a number of weeks for Eddie Howe to be ruthless and to make difficult decisions that he might not want to make. That was one of them because we know how much he admires Sven Botman. We know what sort of defender Sven Botman is. Yes, he's had a difficult run of games where he just hasn't maybe hit the levels we expect of him. But when I felt as if what's been missing at the heart of the defence in the last few weeks is possibly just a lack of communication. And we know when Schär comes back into the side or when he's in the side, he will communicate, he will lead. He's a natural leader. I thought everything he did on Saturday was just exceptional. You know, the way he commanded the area, the way that he worked alongside Manić Chiao, the link up, which shouldn't be overlooked, by the way, because he was playing sort of left side of the kind of middle 2. The link up with Hall when he needed to, the composure he showed bringing the ball out from the back when needed, which we know he can do. And he picked these moments when he did that brilliantly as well. I just thought it was everything we expect of Fabian Schär now. And look, I know he's out of contract at the end of the season, but I hope he gets at least another year because it would be lovely to see him, if not finish his career at Newcastle, certainly go a long way to doing that. He's been a brilliant signing. And we talk a lot about trust with Eddie Howe, and we know for a fact from the minute he came in the club when Schär was out at the side, he put him back in. He's repaid that trust many times over, which is why Eddie wouldn't have thought twice about putting him back in.
And a great attitude from Fabian Schär as well, because a lot of people might have had their faces kind of put out of joint by the fact that they've gone from a first team star to playing on the bench or sitting on the bench rather, and he's come in, he's clearly got the right attitude during the week. It's a team game, it's a squad game, and he's come in, he's taken his chance. 13 defensive actions, including 10 clearances, which was the most in the game. And there was a moment in the second half as Newcastle was seeing out the game where he gets the ball, and instead of doing what he probably would want to naturally do and try and play his way out, he just hoofs it into touch. And I was all for that. And that was also something that I thought was notable kind of throughout the game. You know, sometimes Bruno can be guilty of trying to play the Hollywood pass, or just the wrong pass, or hold on to the ball too much and try and win a tackle in a really, try and win a foul, sorry, in a really dangerous area where if the referee doesn't buy it, suddenly the opposition have got a clear sight of goal. There wasn't that on Saturday. I felt like they were just doing the right things. They were doing the sensible things, the things that will see you collect 3 points at the end of the game, rather than trying to do the clever things which can lead you into trouble.
When you play against teams like Manchester City, the way they're set up, though, you can't, in some areas, you can't be risky. You can't play that way. You've got to play risk-free football. There are areas of the pitch, you know, when you're in the final third, when you can take a little bit of a risk and you can, you know, try something a little unexpected. But I thought it would be cruel to call it back to basics, because it was far from that. But it was very much risk-free, and I think it's a great point. You know, there were times when Newcastle just got rid of the ball, just eased the pressure, got themselves to, you know, the edge of the box, and they defended the box so well. And Schär was a massive part of that. Sort of, you could see him during the game, sort of leading Manić Chiao and the people in front of him as well, the players in front of him, the midfielders. It was an exceptional performance, but it just isn't a surprise, because particularly since Eddie Howe's come in, this is the Fabian Schär that everyone knows and loves. And he's just, again, I'm sorry I'm going off on one here, but for me, he's possibly the best pound-for-pound signing I've seen at Newcastle. Was it 3 million when he came in? You look at the service that he's given the club, the big moments that he's given the club, the achievements. Yeah, absolutely no surprise to see what he did on Saturday.
Manić Chiao, I mean, what more can we say about this man? Every single week, he's just impressing, and he kept Erling Haaland quiet. We've all seen that wonderful challenge in the second half where Haaland's trying a bit of trickery to get past him, and it is just the most beautiful of tackles from Manić Chiao. He just keeps standing. He's on his feet. He doesn't dive. He kind of just guides Haaland into his path and wins the ball. Haaland's on the floor, and you can just see by Haaland's expression, he knows that he's had a tough afternoon, and he's not getting around this wall. He was cool, calm, collective, and in control for the majority of that game was Manić Chiao.
So just on that challenge, basically what's happening there is they're both trying to wait as long as possible for the other to make a decision. So what Chiao's done brilliantly is he could have dived in. He could have absolutely dived in and you know, given away a penalty even, but he's just held off and held off and held off and held off, and he's shown so much discipline and so much patience. And then he's waited for the perfect moment to nick that ball. And that wasn't a one-off, by the way. That happened multiple times during the game where he's made the attack and play predictable with his own composure, his own, you know, decision-making was just perfect. I think one thing that gets overlooked, his use of the ball when he's in possession is exceptional. And we talk about Fabian Schär with that, who is probably the best ball-playing defender Newcastle have had for a long time. Well, he is. Chiao has shown in the early months of his time as a Newcastle player that on the ball he is exceptional. And was it 30 million? That's looking increasingly like a bargain, by the way, because I said it before we recorded, and I've got no problem saying it on air. On current form, on what he's shown in those first 3 months, he's worth double that. He's been absolutely brilliant. And for me, he's been player of the season so far at Newcastle. Going forwards, he just has to maintain what he's doing, not get carried away, you know, and he doesn't seem like the sort of person that will get carried away by stuff. Just keep doing what you're doing, keep listening to coaches, keep working with whoever he's partnering at centre-back, because Newcastle, again, it is early stages, but look as if they have a very, very, very special talent on their hands.
Yeah, certainly so. And I think nearly everyone watching and listening to this will agree with you that Manić Chiao has definitely shown himself to be the best signing of the summer so far. Let's talk about the fullbacks then. The return of Lewis Hall and Tino Livramento. Now, it was a given that Hall would be starting, but I was shocked to see Tino in the starting 11. I thought he was a few weeks away, yet they just looked so good in every single aspect of their game. And you can tell just how much the team's confidence is boosted by the return of them. You know, players not only want to give them the ball, they know that both of them can do something with it. And Lewis Hall in particular really impressed me with his attacking desire. He made 86% of his passes, and 46% of United attacking play came down the left. Now, to put that into context, with Dan Burn at left back, only 36% came down the left against Brentford and only 38% against West Ham. So to me, even though that's only 9 or 10%, that's still actually a massive difference. Now, granted, on Saturday, it might have been the instruction to try and hit City's right back, because you've got Núñez, who is traditionally a midfielder playing there, although he's done a great job at right back. But I'm just leaning more towards the fact that players do feel more confident with Lewis Hall at left back and his ability to actually do something with the ball.
It's made Newcastle less predictable, because we knew when Burn was at left back, realistically, they're not going to attack down that side, because yes, he can get forward, but he ain't going to get forward in the same manner Lewis Hall will. So a lot of Newcastle's attacking play then went to the right-hand side with Trippier and Langer or Murphy, whoever played there. So it's just probably thrown a little bit of doubt in the opposition's mind that they can switch play, they can get forward on both sides. I still think we shouldn't forget with Lewis Hall, by the way, that he is actually a midfielder by trade. He is still in the fairly early stages of his development as a left back. The progress that he's made in the last 18 months is just incredible, and you just feel comfortable. Look, he's not blessed with like blistering pace, but it's very rarely you see him outdone for pace. But that's because of his intelligence in terms of his positioning, again, his decision making, and it just gives balance. It gives balance. Tino probably wouldn't have played if Kieran Trippier had been fit. Obviously, I think he's got a little hamstring injury. But he looked as if he'd never been away. Now, in the two of them, I think there's a genuine argument to say Newcastle could have one of the best fullback pairings in the league. And I mean that, genuinely.
And could be, the starters for England in the World Cup, potentially, if they managed to find some form. It's interesting you mentioned the pace about Lewis Hall. Sam Mulner, actually, when we spoke about Lewis Hall in the last episode we did, said, he's not got pace, but he's got his acceleration. And we saw that on Saturday. Interestingly, from City's point of view, the majority of their attacks came down Newcastle United's right, 38%. Now, again, you could argue that's because Doku was their outlet, but on the other side, I mean, they did have Foden and Shirky, so it's not like they had poor players there. Could it be that Man City just didn't fancy going up against Lewis Hall defensively? Again, for context, 42% of Brentford's attack came down Newcastle's left, and 41% of West Ham's came down Newcastle's left. Now, obviously, Burns playing there, as we said previously, being at left back, you're going to get targeted. But I just found it quite interesting that actually, because there's a discussion to be had, like, who is the better defender, Tino Livramento or Lewis Hall? And I think many would actually pick Tino Livramento. On Saturday, according to the stats, it looks like they thought, don't quite fancy going up against Hall. We're going to try and target Livramento here. And they did do that. And for all they tried, they didn't get the better of Tino, did they?
I would possibly personally look at that slightly differently, that maybe Doku's just in unbelievable form.
Didn't look like it.
No, he didn't. No. But I'm saying before the game, if that's the plan, it's probably because of what he did before the international break, of that performance that he put in against Liverpool. So, look at Tino. I still say put in one of the best fullback performances I've seen in the Carabao Cup final against what you could consider to be one of the best players in the world at the time, in Mo Salah. I did have a little bit of fear on Saturday at Doku because of what he'd done this season so far. I think he's possibly been he has been one of Manchester City's best players of the season. But Tino is he's just tenacious, isn't he? You can see that the player that came into the club, let's be honest, there were doubts about him in terms of injuries when he came in from Southampton, who'd just been relegated. He had a great amount of game time. It took his time to settle, obviously, because Trippier was first choice, but you can see that he's learned from Kieran Trippier. And I think there's possibly a little bit of the dark arts being shown as well, and in the defensive play from Trippier. So, look, I don't think it is a stretch to say there could be England's fullback pairing. Maybe not the World Cup. I still think they might go in a different direction at the World Cup. But you can see them both being in the squad, and then in years to come, possibly establish themselves as the fullback pairing. But Who's a better defender? I don't think that's a discussion that needs to be had. I think just appreciate both of them. Just enjoy it.
Indeed. We've got Mark here saying Hall and Tino outstanding. It's like having 2 extra midfielders, and we'll get onto that in a brief moment. Richie watching on Facebook says playing with 2 recognised fullbacks is the way forward. Sadly, Dan Burn should only be used in the centre of defence.
I don't think that's something to be sad about, though. I think that's his position now.
I think he'd be quite happy with that, wouldn't he? I mean, if he gets game time. We've got Martin saying Hall and Tino were just fantastic. Great to have them back. Fred says we looked much better with Hall and Livramento as fullbacks, as we had much better shape. Now, interestingly, you mentioned Doku being in great form, and we think about Doku as this winger, but for large parts of the game, he was deployed into the centre, sort of playing free role, sort of playing as a number 10, which I found really, really interesting. And looking back, I think it's probably got a large part to do with how Newcastle deployed their fullbacks when Man City had the ball. Now, if you watch the game back, and I noticed this during it as well, you had both Tino and Lewis Hall at times kind of acting as additional centre midfielders. Now, in recent games, City have totally dominated through the middle. That's how they've attacked, and we saw it with the Erling Haaland chance early in the game. It came straight through the middle, just cut Newcastle United open. But that aside, they didn't get any joy through the centre of the park, and it was because of the way Hall and Tino Livramento were deployed. And it was really important that they managed to kind of flood the central area, stop City where they are at their most potent. And Hall and Livramento did it so well. It was a real tactical masterclass from Eddie Howe, because clearly he's watched where City are most dangerous. It's coming through the centre, and what he's done is he's made sure that Hall and Livramento are there, stopping the passes, stopping the play. And it's testament to them and their engine and their stamina to be able to do that, and their tactical awareness. Because with all due respect to Trippier and Burn, they probably do have the tactical awareness to do that. But what they don't have is the pace to get there and get back, get up top. The pace is probably their biggest downfall when it comes to trying to be part of a setup like this, whereas Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall have got it in abundance, and it was so crucial for Newcastle United to deploy that in the right way, and they did do.
Can I throw someone else in that mix as well, which is Jacob Murphy? So I think possibly the thinking behind Doku coming inside so much was to free up space for Nico O'Reilly to break forward from left back, which he's done so effectively over previous weeks throughout the season, to be fair, and for England. But because of that also meant that Jacob Murphy had to be really disciplined defensively, and I thought he did it really well. Look, this goes back to the argument of Eddie Howe the discussion of Eddie Howe trusting players. He trusts Jacob Murphy in big games, and he's just proven why again. Look, in an ideal world, many Newcastle fans may think that there should be someone a bit more flash on that right-hand side, or, obviously we're still waiting for Elanga to hit form. Maybe they think he should be given more of a chance, but at the moment, Jacob Murphy is more than in possession of that shirt. He fully deserves to be. Yes, he's had a couple of games this season where he's been a bit off, but one thing you always get from him is that work rate and the intensity and everything Eddie Howe demands. The point you make about the 2 fullbacks, though, is a really good one, because, again, this goes into making the attacking play predictable. So you just cut off options. I thought Newcastle, the Haaland chance that you mentioned, they learned from that really quickly. And there weren't many times, if any, where Manchester City did get in behind after that. So I think across the board, with special mention to Tino and Hall, it was just such a brilliantly intelligent performance from Newcastle.
Certainly so, and really important to say that Murphy understood what his role was when Hall and Tino Livramento pushed up. It was to offer that cover, and that's what you saw. You saw the wingers dropping back, and those two going into midfield to stop City coming forward. Now, Tino Livramento has been asked about his future, and some might be shouting at the TV or to your phone now saying, "Stop unsettling our stars." But this is the job. This is the first time Tino Livramento has really had the chance to speak about his future, and obviously Ross Wilson's just come into the building, so you're going to ask that question about potentially a new deal, and he was, and he said, "That's nothing that I'm in control of. I leave that to my dad, to my agent. For me, I've been out working for 7 weeks. I've been working really hard to come back and obviously help the team. I'm very happy with how I've played. He was then asked if he was happy on Tyneside, and he said, "Of course. Have you not seen it out there?" So Ross Wilson, if you're watching, get a Tino Livramento signed up. Give him the keys to the city. Yeah.
Well, keys to the city's possibly a little over the top, but no. Look, I've said this a few times that players have to earn new contracts. They can't just be given them because there's a little bit of mention in the press of this club being interested or that club. Tino Livramento looks like the sort of player that could be Newcastle's right back for the next 10 years. Now, if Newcastle are serious about getting to where they want to go, do we see Tino Livramento possibly being a fullback that can win major honours on a regular basis? 100%. Do I think he could be England's right back for the next 10 years? Absolutely. So, yes, I agree. Get him in, have these talks, get him nailed down, give him a new contract and reward him for the progression. We don't know how Newcastle view that. He still has time left on his current deal and quite a significant amount. But look, this is going to happen, though. This is how modern day football works. There is always going to be interest in top players, whether you're at Real Madrid or Newcastle or wherever. So we're probably going to have to start getting used to this and not getting too carried away when the media do mention X, Y, Z being linked with Tino or Lewis Hall or Sandro Tonali or Bruno, whoever. It's just the way modern football is. But Newcastle do need to protect themselves to a degree. And I'm sure they'll do that. You know, the new structures in place, the review that they've conducted since David Hopkinson's come in and since Wilson's come in is all but done. So they will have new processes that they're putting in place. We know there's been changes made, and I've got no doubt whatsoever contract talks will be next on the agenda.
Let's talk about the goal scorer then, Harvey Barnes. And I feel like his downfall at Newcastle is that he's never really taken his chance to nail down that position on the wing when he's been given a consistent run of games. And that has to change, and it did so on Saturday. Great strike to open the scoring and a quick reaction for the second. But we need to talk about the first half, really. Two glorious chances. The second one is an utter sitter, great crossing by Murphy, and how he's managed to miss that, I'm still not too sure. So it was really important for him personally to grab a goal in that second half, just so everyone's not focusing on Barnes. What a sitter you've missed.
Yeah, I mean, the first two chances, the thing I would say is that he's in the right area. And he's getting to the areas that we haven't really seen Anthony Gordon get into this season. So the chance he missed put me in mind of Gordon's goal against Manchester United. Was it last season? Or the season before, where he's got him back post and tapped it in from literally inside the 6-yard box. That kind of reminded me of that, which we haven't seen from Gordon enough over the last 12 months. But I think it says a lot. Did Eddie Howe say it about Barnes that he likes the fact that he's not scared to miss? He's you know, if he does miss, his mindset isn't to dwell on it.
If you talk to people at the club, one of the most consistent things people will say is that he's the best finisher at the club.
Yeah.
And we saw that with the first goal.
Yeah, I mean, I look at that first goal and the interplay between him and Bruno is just exceptional, around some high-class players, by the way. But the finish, again, we could probably do a podcast on this on its own. The finish with his right foot, curling it away from, for my money, the best keeper in the world. It's not an easy finish because he's almost falling over as well when he's hitting it. It's a brilliant finish. And look, this now has to be the start of Harvey Barnes' Newcastle United career. Yes, he's had big moments, you know, the West Ham game when he came off the bench, for example, but they've been few and far between. But now he's in possession of the shirt. He's going to cause problems for Anthony Gordon to get back in. And he looks like the sort of player that that will be a threat on a regular basis. He's got a little bit of a carrot at the end of the season as well with the World Cup, whether that's in white or blue, we don't know yet, given his quotes last week. But I think this has to be the start. It's given him a foundation to build on, and hopefully he does it because he seems the right sort of character. He seems to have the trust and the admiration of Eddie Howe and his coaching staff, and he certainly made a name for himself and Newcastle fans based on Saturday's performance alone. In
many ways, he's very similar to what has to happen with Newcastle United from here on in. You know, you've done it. Let's keep going. We will talk about the goals in a bit more depth in a second, but there's a few of the first half moments I just want to discuss. And the first thing I want to do is to heap praise on Nick Pope. He had a relatively quiet afternoon, but he deserves so much praise for the first half effort that Haaland had. I mean, it's a full-on blown effort by his standards, but by anyone else, it's a half effort. That position of play that we were talking about when he's played through the middle. And most days of the week, that's ended up in the back of the net. I genuinely think that Erling Haaland did not expect Nick Pope to rush out off his line. He looks up and all of a sudden there's Nick Pope and he fluffs that chance. How often do we see Nick Pope come off his line doing that? Because it was very uncharacteristic from him. But more importantly, he does it with confidence. And I think sometimes that's half the issue with Nick Pope. You can tell when he's got the ball at his feet, or when he does have to come off his line and play that super keeper, he's not confident. And if you're not confident doing that, then you might as well not do it, because that's half the battle. It's like anything in life. If you're not confident doing what you've got to do, then you might as well not do it. He did it, and I think that was a huge, huge moment in the game, because it's very early on. If Haaland puts it away like most people are expecting him to do, it's a totally different afternoon. But that was so important from Nick Pope. It really, really was.
If he even holds back a split second from rushing from his line there, Haaland gets the ball under control, fully under control, probably rounds him and scores. The fact that Haaland had just taken his first touch when Pope was pretty much in his face has panicked him. You can see it, which is quite a surprise for a high-class striker and one of the best finishers in world football. The fact that he did panic. You're right, Pope deserves massive credit for that. And look, he's had a lot of stick, and we've had our say on here, that Ramsdale should maybe be handing more of a chance. Pope's possibly shown once again why Eddie Howe wants to keep giving him chances. And yeah, I mean, apart from that, he did really make too many saves.
One save where he just stands tall. He doesn't know a lot about it, but he does what a goalkeeper has to do in that position, and just make sure you've not gone down and you're just as tall as you can be. Hits him in the chest. It's a very, very good save from him, and again, a really important moment. We've got Phil Foden going down under a challenge from Fabian Schär. Wayne Rooney thinks it is a penalty, although Wayne Rooney's opinion of late has been quite questionable. I don't know if people have seen it, but apparently Erling Haaland wasn't in his top 3 strikers of the season so far. So I'm not going to take any advice off Wayne Rooney when it comes to this VAR decision. Little reminder, Foden gets a shot off. Schär wipes him out, clear contact with the ankle. But for me, Foden's already got the shot off, and that's the important element of that decision. You're going to disagree. You think it's a penalty.
So I'm really boring, and I've looked at the official interpretation of what the referee may have thought. Then.
That's not boring. That's what we're here for.
So the interpretation is that if it's momentum and the defender's already committed and momentum takes him into the player, then it's not a foul. The kind of grey area comes when it's reckless, and it was slightly high, the challenge. I think it's caught him on the ankle. I think I'm like a massive sitting. I'm edging towards it was the right decision not to give it. But at the same time, if it was given, I'm not really sure there'd be a strong argument against it.
I mean, that first rule that you've read out there, the first interpretation, that's just daft in itself.
Oh, well, it is. It's foul's a foul of it.
But for me, he's got the shot off. So Fabian Schär hasn't influenced the shot because the tackle comes after. Now, if Foden's got the ball at his feet with that challenge and that contact, it's a penalty all day long. But the chance is gone. So for me, it's not a penalty.
Like I say, I think I mentioned towards the fact it was the right decision, but at the same time, as I said, I'm not sure I could have given a firm argument why it was. It shouldn't have been if it was given.
We've got a couple of chances for Nick Waldemade. A great header, which Donnarumma produces a world-class save. Nothing Waldemade can do with that. He's done everything that he needs to do. Great cross in by Jacob Murphy. Second one, I think he should do slightly better. I think he kind of snatches it's kind of straight at Donnarumma to a degree. It's down to his right, but it's not a difficult save to make, I don't think. I think he should do better. Did you think, after those 2 chances go begging, then the Harvey Barnes chance at the start, and then the one towards the end of the first half as well, were you sitting there thinking, oh, here we go again?
No, because the fact Newcastle were creating good chances felt like a positive in itself. I didn't really feel against Brentford, West Ham, whoever, that even Bilbao to an extent, that they were creating really good chances on a consistent basis. Whereas with this one, it very much was. And I thought, I'm not going to say I felt it would always come, because you can't predict stuff like that against teams like Manchester City. But yeah, it felt like a positive. It felt like something was happening. It felt as if there was that energy and unpredictability in the final third. And I mean, yeah, Walter I felt from a little bit on Saturday. I thought he had a good game without really catching the eye. His work rate was good. His hold-up play was better than it has been. And I think as well, and this goes back all the way back to Tino and Lewis Hall being in the side, we saw Barnes and Murphy linking up with Walter more because of the fact they had the two fullbacks behind them, I think, because of, and again, that goes into the midfield as well, because they knew there was always an out ball, a kind of positive out ball out wide where the fullbacks were getting forward. So everything just linked in nicely with Newcastle where it hasn't in previous weeks. And it is purely because of the fullbacks.
Yeah, I think Voldemort had a good game without writing any of the headlines. One thing that did concern me was the fact that I think Eddie Howe waited for as long as he possibly could not to take him off. You could quite clearly see he was running on empty. He had to bring a Langer on because obviously Sean Neves, as you're going to tell us, isn't ready for that kind of game, and there's no one else. I mean, you couldn't make it up. The fact that Will Sula is now out for a period of time, he's going to have to go and see a specialist. I mean, Newcastle's look when it comes to strikers is just totally out. And that is a concern going forward because is Wissa going back for Everton? No, we're probably looking second or third game maybe into December. I know he was there in the dressing room, but he has been in the mix and he has been at games. I don't think the fact that he was there in the dressing room celebrating is any big suggestion that he's going to be ready for Sunday against Everton. I still think he's a few games away, and Newcastle wanting to make that instant impact, so they're not rushing him back. Which means going forward, probably over the next 2 or 3 games, Champions League, Everton, Tottenham, he's going to have to turn to Elanga or maybe even Murphy or Gordon if he's back to make that position their own when Voldemort has to come off. And that's a horrible position for Eddie Howe to be in.
It is, yeah. I mean, look, the Wissa thing's unfortunate, isn't it, really? Because he was the ideal signing for Newcastle, Premier League ready, allows Walter to settle in the Premier League and picks up this injury on international duty. He hasn't played a minute of football yet, and we're all sat here waiting for him to come back, and the way it goes on and on and on probably heightens the need for another striker in January. I know we're not really discussing January today, but it is true. They do need another one. Sean Neves has shown signs this season, and obviously I watched quite a bit of the 21s, that he is progressing as an all-round player and as a striker. But I keep saying this, I'm not sure he's ready to be thrust in the Premier League just yet. If it is, it'll be cameos. It certainly wouldn't have been a cameo against Manchester City. Would you maybe do that against Everton if Voldemort has to come off with 10 minutes left, just pop Neves up front? And you used it last week, didn't you, the week before, when you talked about strikers' instincts, and Elanga won't have that. So if a chance was created, then would he be in the right area? But at the same time, I'm not sure Newcastle were in the mindset to go and try and get a third goal. I think it was very much at that point just about, can we trouble them with energy and, don't worry about a third, just keep them out.
Yeah, and they did that. We'll discuss that in a moment. Martin says, the last 8 weeks while we have played without Hall and Tino and we've had trouble, we should have made the board's mind up by getting Hall and Tino tied down to new deals. Doug says, I think Barnes has a better eye for goal than Gordon and would have played him as a striker rather than Gordon a few games back. Lots of praise in the comments for Tino Livramento and Lewis Hall. Gary says, on another day, Voldemort would have buried those 2 chances. I'm not doubting that at all. Let's talk about this first goal then, because we've briefly in different parts of the show discussed how wonderful it is, and it is a thing of beauty. It's such a good team goal. What I love about it is the fact that Tonali is pressed so high. He's right on the back of the defence, and he forces them into a really careless and uncharacteristic clearance. That's not how City clear the lines, but it's a kick over the head from, I think it's probably Diaz, and it falls down. Then Joelinton's first to it, and you watch, he bursts forward. It's only 5 or 6 yards, but he sprints to it, wants it more than anybody else, gets it. Bruno, and it's a 1-2-3 between him and Harvey Barnes. He's tackled, but he stretches his leg out, gives it to Barnes, and Barnes reacts. And as we say, it's a wonderful finish. But I just felt there was so many good elements of Newcastle's all-round play in that goal. The press, the desire, and then also the ability to just create something. And they wanted it more than City. And I think we saw that in that 2.5 minutes which then ended up into the goal.
It's all the good aspects of the midfield that we've grown to admire over the last 12 months. You know, the tenacity, the power, the will to just make life difficult for opposition, but also the high class player from Bruno in particular in terms of in possession. I said it before, but the run that he makes, and we've spoken about this, by the way, about the need for a midfielder to go and join in the attacking play, because at times in those poor performances, they were almost playing as a flat three quite deep. And there was this massive space between them and kind of the front three, or Voltemade and the wingers at least. Bruno, that run is just put City right in the back foot. And then again, and sorry, I said this earlier as well, but the interplay between him and Barnes it's absolutely world class. It really is. It's such clever play, and the finish is just brilliant. I think it's it shows why he is discussed as the best finisher at the club.
Then the equaliser comes shortly after, and it's annoying that Tonali didn't clear his lines in the build-up to the corner, but then, there's enough of an opportunity to get the ball clear. City do very well to make sure that Newcastle are penned in that instance. Diaz gets it, Schär's unlucky, goes through his legs. Really important about how Newcastle United react. And what I liked about the reaction, straight away, Voltemade is hyping up his teammates, he's hyping up the crowd, his arms are growing, he wants that reaction, the crowd responds, there's a massive roar, and we know how good Newcastle United can be when there is that connection between the fan base and the players. And I think that reaction in the instant aftermath of the goal was so crucial, because most teams wilt, most teams then sit back, most teams feel sorry for themselves. Newcastle United, no, they smelled blood, and they were like, you know what, we've conceded here, being the better side, we're going to go and get that second goal. And thankfully it did come, but the reaction was key.
And it takes a lot of bravery to be like that against a team like Manchester City, the form that they were in, the form that Newcastle were in. It would have been easy for Newcastle just to go, it's going against us again. But I think when you look at the mentality of some players and that, or the leadership that was shown during that spell, the fact he picked out Voltemade is brilliant, because he's still new to the group, yet he's the one taking the lead. So it shows to me that he can quickly become a leader in the group, despite the fact he's new to the squad and he's new to the league and such like. This, again, goes back to, this is the Eddie Howe Newcastle United we love, where the setbacks almost inspire them. And I felt that's what it was. The goal is just, teams like Manchester City will punish you for any lapse, no matter what it is. That's happened, but they've just got on with it and got back into the lead with what I actually thought was quite an underrated finish, by the way.
Well, it's a great touch from Barnes to bring it down, and a very difficult angle for them to twist and get it into the back of the net. It's been described as controversial. That's the narrative that City wants it to paint, but there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. And I said in my brief match verdict that I was really, really wound up on the drive home, had BBC 5 Live on, and the newsreader, there's been a 2-1 win for Newcastle United in controversial circumstances. It's like, wait there, the rule was applied. They checked it. They had the automated offside. They had VAR. It took 5.5 minutes. And then he gave the reason to why it was controversial. It was like the sleeve is the margin to why the goal was not chalked off. It's like, wait there. So they've checked it, and the sleeve is the reason. So it's all legal and above board, no conspiracies. That wound us up. There wasn't a foul on Donnarumma. Like Newcastle for the equaliser, there was enough time between that incident and the actual goal for City to just be better in defence, and they weren't. Bruno is onside. Like the first goal that Newcastle scored, it's all about who wants it more. Bruno Guimarães flings himself towards that ball like he's chucking himself out of a burning building.
Despite the fact he's being held.
Yes. Just the desire to get there, to want it, hits the bar, and Barnes does the rest. Absolutely nothing wrong with that goal whatsoever.
So I think I've heard one, possibly two pundits discussing what the main fault in that goal was. And that's that Donnarumma, for a guy who's 6'7", needed very little impact from Harvey Barnes or whoever's around him to go to ground. When the ball's in the air, when he can claim it, he's not strong enough. And again, I will say, I think he is, for me, the best keeper in the world. But all this talk about possible offsides, possible fouls, possible this, just distracts from the fact that the goalkeeper dropped a clanger. Simple as that. Simple as that. Newcastle have kept the ball alive brilliantly. They've provided quality in the box. They've provided determination, and they've got the rewards. But we're not discussing the fact that the goalkeeper has not done his job.
Yeah, and if you look at the goal, there's the initial corner cleared, the ball back in from Murphy. Voldemort wins the first header. Bruno wins the second header. It then bounces. Barnes controls it. So you're talking 3 or 4 chances for City to clear their lines. And I think it was Rob Green on Match of the Day too, or Match of the Day, sorry. And he was like, there's nothing wrong with that. So there's a top-class Premier League goalkeeper telling everyone nothing wrong with that. Basically, it's Donnarumma's fault for getting dragged into the middle of the group of players. Barnes barely put a finger on him. Absolutely ludicrous. And then the bottom line is 5.5 minutes. They checked it. Nothing wrong with it. And they weren't even actually checking for the foul. They were checking for the offside.
And I think Green made a point about how Donnarumma got the wrong side of the ball by the time Barnes had even made contact as well. So he was kind of trying to get backwards to get the ball. So again, I think the goalkeeper's at fault, and that's been kind of overlooked to a degree.
Yeah. And then Newcastle saw the game out so professionally. No clear-cut chances for Manchester City. It's not as if they were penned in. And that is reaffirmed by the fact, if you go and watch Match today, after Newcastle's second goal, I think there's literally 30 seconds left of the highlights package, and it's one where Savinho smashes the ball in the leaders end. That sums up the chances that City had after that goal. For me, it felt like a mentality switch, which is really, really important, because against Liverpool, against Arsenal, I felt like the goal was coming. I felt like Newcastle United just wouldn't be able to hang on, and they didn't. But here, I never felt like City were going to grab the equaliser. I wasn't worried. I was confident Newcastle were going to see it out. They had moments with Elanga, with Joe Willock, with Murphy, where they got the ball up into the corners. So they managed to waste time. Tonali had a good run as well. They just looked comfortable. And for me, this could be more than just 3 points. We hope it's more than just 3 points in terms of it kickstarting Newcastle's domestic campaign, but also that mentality switch against the top sides, where if you're leading 1-0 at 93 minutes on the clock, or you're 2-2, that you're not going to concede a winner or an equaliser. And I feel like this hopefully is the foundation for Newcastle United to feel comfortable in their own skin when they are seeing a game out against the top side.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's the first time I think this season we've seen that sort of consistency in approach throughout the game. Most times this season, even when they've won games, they've been sort of peaks and troughs in games. They've never looked in control. I think even when they've won comfortably in games, Forest, for example, I never thought they looked fully in control in that game. But Saturday, and again, it goes back to what we spoke about at the start, even when they weren't in possession of the ball, they looked in control. They looked as if they knew what they were doing, that everyone knew their roles. Everyone knew how to kind of dictate the game, even without the ball. And I think that has to be carried forwards in every game, not just a Champions League night, not just one of the big clubs coming to St. James's, the kind of title challengers coming to St. James's. That has to be in every single game now. There are games when you maybe have to allow the opposition to have more of the ball. I dare say when the return game takes place at the Eddie Howe, Newcastle aren't going to see a lot of the ball.
They had 33% possession mark at home. Any less of the ball?
No, but it wouldn't surprise you if that happened when they went to, when they went there. So I think it should give them confidence and belief in their own ability to see out games, to dictate games with and without the ball, and to claim big results no matter who the opposition are.
So the next question, because we are going to talk about Pep Guardiola losing his mind and shamefully going after the cameraman, which I thought was horrendous, to be quite honest with you. Usually like Pep, but that was so uncalled for. And Joelinton also having to be pushed away by Eddie Howe. But I've written down here, Mark, the big question, and I've written it in caps. So I don't know, should I shout it out or should I just read it calmly?
Don't shout. No, not on a Monday morning.
Why can you do this at home against Man City and not away to West Ham or Brentford? Please make it make sense.
I can't.
Think Eddie Howe can?
I think Eddie would argue maybe there were mitigating circumstances about both of those games, but I just thought Newcastle were just poor. Simple as that. I think it would be cruel to question motivation and attitude, but at the same time, possibly quite understandable to do that when you've gone to particularly West Ham when everything was in their favour to go and get a result, to get the early lead, to then lose in the manner that they did. Same against Brentford, even though they weren't playing well, to get the lead should be seen as a positive.
I would hope that, I think Eddie Howe will share this frustration, but I would hope the players are frustrated at themselves as well, and that serves as added motivation. I think they would have been hugely disappointed at West Ham and Brentford, and that pushed them to what we saw on Saturday. But also, I think what we want to happen actually is for them to go on the plane today to Marseille or over a Sunday afternoon and we're watching the highlights back and thinking, we were so good there. We were so good. I mean, this is Eddie Howe's 100th win as Newcastle United manager, and that is in my top 10 performances, if not the top 5. He was so good. It was a tactical masterclass, right? If I'm Bruno, if I'm Tonali, I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, yeah, we were excellent, but why couldn't we do that 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, and it's a good point. The players, everyone naturally will look towards the manager for this, and why isn't he doing this with his side? Why isn't he doing that? But as well, the players have got to take some responsibility for those performances. It's very easy, particularly in modern day when we've got social media and we've got all this, for players to be able to hide behind the manager. But I think you're right. Yeah, there is a degree of that they have to take responsibility. They have to, not just looking back, but going forwards as well. Right, we've set the tone. The big players in the group. This is what we can do. We know we can. Let's go and attack the rest of the season because there's still a lot to play for.
Yeah, and obviously having Hall and Tino back is a huge difference to what Newcastle United can do. But it wouldn't surprise me if they did indeed lose to Everton down at, what is it these days? What's it called?
The Hill Dickinson Stadium.
I hope I'm wrong. I mean, I was very wrong about this game, so there we go. I predicted 7-0 victory for Everton and Newcastle will win. That's the way it tends to go. Let's have a bit of a discussion about the full time then, because it was very, very funny in terms of City being absolutely wound up. As I said, the cameraman incident, that's not funny. That's totally out of line. And actually, I genuinely hope the Premier League come down hard on Pep Guardiola. There's no way she would put hands on the cameraman and all of that. That's just, no matter what's going on in the game, the cameraman's got a job to do. He's getting paid to do that. He's getting instructions from people in his ear. He's just doing his job and getting paid a hell of a lot less than Pep Guardiola is. I think that was so disrespectful, and Pep should be apologising and hopefully getting a fine, in my honest opinion. But then you've got this kind of obviously City were very, very angry. They couldn't handle the physicality. They didn't like the way that Newcastle were in their faces, and that's spilled out into what happened full time. They felt aggrieved. We've gone over the decisions. Even taking away the Newcastle bias, I'd have no reason to think they've been hard done by. What I love the fact, though, is that you've got Joelinton. Now, bearing in mind, he waited until like the 92nd minute to get booked, which I thought was great from him. But he is. I mean, he was very lucky probably not to get sent off. He was gunning for someone, wasn't he? I think he's been wound up by Diaz and Donnarumma. And Eddie Howe, after leading his side to a famous victory, he's the man who pushes them away. He's the man that protects Joelinton from doing anything a little bit daft.
I think it was him and Stephen Purchase, wasn't it? Just pushing him back. I mean, tell you what, that's not a job I'd want to do, by the way. Pushing Joelinton back when he's in that mood.
He was raging, wasn't he?
He was foaming, but again, I quite like that.
That's the sign of Newcastle United have done a good job. They've not only won the game, I think when City have been deservedly beaten, they will look for excuses and they'll react like this. And that's what they've done. They've reacted badly. They've looked for excuses when actually all that does to me is point to the fact that Newcastle United were deserved winners.
There's nothing better than St James's under the floodlights in a big game when the players are up for it and they're intense, and it becomes a cauldron. I know it's a cliche, but it becomes an absolute cauldron. And I think it's just even better when you see a reaction from an opposition at the end of a game when they know they've been, I'm not going to say outplayed because that's too much, they weren't outplayed, but when they've been outbattled.
I don't know about that,
When they've been beaten, they weren't outplayed. That it would be a step too far to say that. But Newcastle, with and without the ball, were very, very good, and it was frustration. That's what it was. It was born out of frustration. Simple as that. There is no excuse for what Pep did, and I'm honestly one of Pep's biggest fans since he was a player. I've always loved him. Loved the teams he puts together as a manager. I think they're just so good to watch. But it's out of order what he did, and a number of his players were out of order as well for their attitudes. But at the same time, I love that Newcastle players stuck together and didn't back down.
Where you saw Bruno arguing with Pep Guardiola.
And Bruno went back for it, by the way.
Yeah.
Because they kind of came apart, and then Bruno went back at him, which was quite interesting to see.
Well, it's like, he's my best mate, isn't he, Joelinton? So you're not having a little wind up with him. Even if you go for him, you go for all of us, and that's it. That's the underpin, isn't it, of Newcastle United and Eddie Howe? It's every man is together, and that's what makes it so special. Got a few questions in from people watching live. Thank you very much for tuning in. Got a few questions about the team tomorrow night. John says, how many changes would you make against Marseille? And a few people are suggesting that actually Gordon and Elanga might start. I don't think that will happen.
I'm not sure Gordon will. Elanga wouldn't be massively surprised, but I think he'll just go with probably the same side. I don't think there's a need to change it.
I think it'll be unchanged. We've got Daniel saying, I think Trippier as the third fullback is fine, or even Burn in a pinch, but they can't both be on together. And obviously Tino and Hall are the best when available. We've got Graham saying the performance is about the sum of its parts. Hall and Tino made such a huge difference. A few criticisms of Elanga. I mean, he came on, he saw instantly he wasn't going to be doing what Waldemar had done and bring that aerial presence. But what he did do was offer a bit of energy and a bit of pace. Not an ideal situation, but he did enough to make it a little bit easier for Newcastle to stay out the game.
He made City worry about the break, about the counter attack, and that was his job. He tried to close down, and he did that fairly well. Trying to force the play into certain areas. And there were several times where he did look as if he could get him behind and the ball just wasn't quite right. So I think to that degree, he's done the job Eddie would have asked of him.
Yeah, certainly so. I've got a few people saying, apology that I delivered at the start of the show is not accepted. Well, I'm sorry for that as well. But yes, we're going to have plenty of content coming your way to preview the game against Marseille. We'll have the match preview with John Gibson coming out later today. Lee Ryder is over there, so watch out for some podcasts from him as well. Then me and Mark will be back on Wednesday morning, hopefully discussing a positive victory for Newcastle in the Champions League. And then we'll look ahead to Everton. So much to get on with. Thank you very much for spending the time with us this afternoon. Do hit subscribe, do hit thumbs up on YouTube, get into the comments as well. If you're on the audio-only platform, do leave us a rating and review. And remember to take advantage of your NordVPN discounted plan by clicking the link in the podcast description box. And me and Mark will see you on Wednesday.